breaking updates. Very important. The movie apparently is not very good. I haven't seen it yet. I would be shocked if it were.
I know this point has been made, but this truly is the worst casting maybe in the history of the film industry.
And the star, Rachel Zegler, is unbelievably charmless in public. Studios really need to go back to what they originally did, which was tell your stars to shut up and not say things, because no one is paying to hear your star say offensive things off the screen.
I think it's fair to say that no one can stand the star of this movie.
Disney's Snow White was essentially a box office dud.
This is truly, she has to go. I'm sorry, Disney. She has to go.
The cinema score, which is basically how audiences respond to the film, is a B+, which generally is not terrible, but it actually is quite terrible with regard to kids' films. Kids' films are graded on a curve. There's never been a Disney live-action remake that is graded lower than an A- except for Snow White.
Ben Shapiro didn't just criticize Snow White, he dismantled it with surgical precision. In what quickly went viral as one of his most scathing rants, he took direct aim at Rachel Zegler, branding her as unbelievably charmless and a PR nightmare.
Early estimates suggested they would take in 48 to 58 million in the first weekend. Apparently, it did 43 million in its first weekend. It cost $270 million to make. $270 million.
Because Rachel Zegler is a PR nightmare.
But this wasn't some petty commentary. It was a calculated cultural critique. Shapiro wasn't just talking about a bad performance or a weak script. He was targeting what he saw as a growing trend in Hollywood, actors who act like they're above the story. His argument? If you're cast in an iconic role, your job is to respect the legacy, not treat it like a joke.
A lot of people don't like her. She's got a big mouth. She talked trash about the original movie.
He slammed Zegler's interviews where she dismissed the 1937 original, mocking the idea of a princess falling in love with a prince.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Shapiro warned that audiences aren't paying to watch a star lecture them about what's problematic. They're there for the fantasy. He even took a jab at Disney's management, suggesting they've lost control over their talent. In his view, the entire situation was a result of executives failing to rein in a star who forgot who she was working for. And for a company as image-conscious as Disney, that's a brutal accusation.
Snow White, there's an enormous amount of controversy surrounding Snow White, obviously.
Now, one thing about Rachel Zegler is that we know that she's not helping at all one bit.
Let's talk numbers, because they don't lie. Disney reportedly poured a jaw-dropping $270 million into the production and marketing of Snow White. That's Marvel-level spending. That's, we expect this to be a blockbuster kind of confidence. But when opening weekend rolled around, the results were humiliating. Instead of pulling in a solid $50 million, which was already on the low side for a film of this scale, it dragged in just $43 million. And that wasn't just underwhelming. It was catastrophic.
Every time she opens her mouth, it's crisis mode when it comes to Disney, having to backtrack. She talks about how this isn't a fairy tale about falling in love with the prince. This is a fairy tale about fighting your own battle.
Disney's Snow White was essentially a box office dud.
This wasn't just a flop. It was a public failure. The kind that industry insiders whisper about at award shows and execs pretend didn't happen. The kind of financial implosion that leads to layoffs, firings, and entire strategy overhauls. And what made it worse was that everyone saw it coming. The controversy had been brewing for months. The online backlash was relentless. And yet, Disney still pushed forward, blindly, some might say, believing the brand alone could carry them through. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Even loyal Disney fans stayed away, signaling that no franchise is safe when you ignore your audience. When Disney announced Rachel Zegler would play Snow White, the internet did a double take, and not in a good way. While some praised the casting as inclusive, many fans and critics, including Ben Shapiro, saw it as a complete departure from the source material. Snow White, as written in the original fairy tale, is literally described as having skin as white as snow. That's not a metaphor. That's the character's name. And while the race debate took center stage, Shapiro argued it wasn't about racism. It was about accuracy and narrative coherence. This wasn't about attacking Zegler's talent, though Shapiro had his opinions on that too. It was about how far a studio should go to modernize a classic before it becomes unrecognizable. The casting became symbolic of what many saw as Disney's growing disconnect from its own history. Instead of honoring the timeless visuals and themes that made Snow White iconic, the film tried to reinvent the wheel. And audiences weren't having it. They didn't want a modern reimagining. They wanted a fairy tale. And instead, they got controversy wrapped in CGI. Let's be clear, actors giving interviews is nothing new. But when you're the face of a beloved franchise, every word you say matters. And Rachel Zegler? She said all the wrong things, over and over again. From mocking the original film's love story to openly admitting she found the original scary and outdated, she didn't just fail to promote the movie, she actively undermined it. Fans watched in disbelief as the star of Snow White basically told the world she hated Snow White. And this wasn't just a one-off comment. It became a pattern. Every press junket, every red carpet, every clip seemed to feature Zegler distancing interviews, and the very film she was supposed to embody. The backlash wasn't just swift, it was viral. Memes exploded. YouTube takedowns gained millions of views. And the phrase PR nightmare stopped being an exaggeration. At a time when the studio needed charm, warmth, and nostalgia, they got sarcasm, disdain, and viral embarrassment. For many, this was the final straw. If there was one thing that symbolized just how off-course Disney had gone with the Snow White reboot, it was the decision to replace the Seven Dwarfs. For decades, these characters weren't just sidekicks, they were iconic. Each had their own personality, their own charm, and their own place in pop culture. From grumpy to dopey, they were part of what made Snow White magical. So when Disney announced they'd be removed in favor of magical CGI creatures, the internet exploded. It wasn't just fans who were baffled. Actors like Peter Dinklage spoke out too, accusing Disney of trying to be progressive in the worst possible way. And how did Disney respond? They didn't hire more little people. They cast average-sized actors and used CGI to shrink them down. It was a bizarre decision that felt neither inclusive nor respectful. It was lazy. And the result? A soulless, uncanny valley parade of awkward, forgettable creatures that had none of the heart or personality of the originals. Ben Shapiro and others pointed out that this change was yet another example of Disney rewriting beloved material in ways no one asked for. It wasn't an update, it was a deletion. And when fans realized the title Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs no longer applied to the story being told, it became clear. This wasn't a remake. It was a total rewrite masquerading as nostalgia. One that lost its way and its audience before the movie even hit theaters. Now, let's talk about one of the most ridiculous parts of this remake, something that even casual viewers couldn't overlook. The core conflict of Snow White revolves around the evil queen being jealous of Snow White's beauty. Simple, right? But when you cast Gal Gadot, an international supermodel and former Miss Israel, as the jealous stepmother and Rachel Zegler as the fairest of them all, you're setting yourself up for mockery. And that's exactly what happened. Ben Shapiro mocked it ruthlessly, and fans echoed his sentiments. We're supposed to believe Gal Gadot is jealous of Rachel Zegler? Really? The entire premise crumbled under the weight of its own casting. Because in a fairy tale, some suspension of disbelief is expected. Talking animals? Sure. Poisoned apples? Fine. But when the core of your story is envy, and it doesn't make visual sense, the illusion is shattered. It's not just confusing, it's laughable. And worse, it made the villains seem absurd rather than menacing. A queen driven mad by jealousy needs a believable reason. But here, the dynamic didn't just fail to land. It flipped the entire narrative upside down. Audiences were left wondering if the mirror was broken, or if Disney just didn't care anymore. Once again, it was a case of the studio choosing style over story, and paying the price for it. $270 million. Let that number sink in. That's the kind of budget usually reserved for superhero sagas or intergalactic epics. But for Snow White, that number raised a lot of questions, none of which Disney seemed prepared to answer. Where did that money go? Because based on the trailers and final cut, audiences didn't see $270 million on the screen. What they did see was muddy CGI, lifeless character designs, and promotional materials that looked more like Photoshop practice than blockbuster marketing. Fans were already skeptical, but this budget revelation turned curiosity into suspicion. What exactly were they paying for? If it wasn't for a faithful story, wasn't for a cast beloved by the fandom, and wasn't for groundbreaking visuals, then what was it? Critics began dissecting every inch of the movie, looking for any sign of value, and mostly came up empty. From the wooden acting to the uninspired dialogue to the forgettable set pieces, the film looked like it cost half the price. Shapiro and other commentators used the budget as a punchline, a symbol of Disney's overconfidence and mismanagement. In an era where every dollar is scrutinized, Snow White became the ultimate example of bad spending. Not just financially, but creatively. And audiences, sensing the disconnect, responded the only way they could. They stayed home. You'd think that with a remake of one of their most beloved classics, Disney would roll out a marketing campaign soaked in nostalgia, charm, and reverence. Instead, they gave fans the exact opposite. From Rachel Zegler's infamous interviews to trailers that felt more like generic fantasy knockoffs, every bit of promotion seemed to scream, "This isn't for you." It was bold, yes, but it was also baffling. The very people who grew up on Snow White, the ones most likely to buy tickets, were ignored, mocked, or even insulted. The promotional tone came off condescending. It wasn't "we're reimagining a classic," it was "the original was stupid and we fixed it." That kind of messaging doesn't inspire ticket sales. It inspires boycotts. People felt alienated by the very people who were asking for their money. Disney's arrogance, amplified by Zegler's tone, created a wall between the product and the audience. And no amount of special effects could bridge that gap. This wasn't just a misfire, it was a warning to the industry. If you're going to remake something beloved, don't treat it like it's broken. Because your audience will notice, and they will walk away. You might expect that a company as big and powerful as Disney would have some kind of foresight. That with millions on the line, someone would have pulled Rachel Zegler aside and said, "Hey, maybe stop calling the movie dumb?" But according to insiders, that didn't happen. In fact, executives were reportedly shocked by the backlash. They truly didn't see it coming, which, in today's viral world, is nearly impossible to believe. The lack of damage control, the unchecked interviews, and the complete meltdown of fan goodwill suggest a studio completely out of touch. Maybe they believed brand loyalty would override all criticism. Maybe they thought the controversy would blow over. But what they didn't count on was the internet turning this film into a meme, a shared joke about how not to handle a remake. The whispers started quickly. Were there last-minute re-edits? Internal debates? Scrap trailers? Some believe Disney even considered delaying the release, but couldn't afford to admit defeat. Whatever the truth, the result was clear. The studio was caught off guard, the audience was already gone, and the damage was irreversible. At the end of the day, Disney's Snow White isn't just a failed movie. It's a case study in how to alienate your audience, miscast your leads, and misread the entire mood of the public. It's not that people didn't want a remake, they just didn't want this remake. The heart was missing, the magic was gone, and the lead actress was too busy trashing the past to sell the present. Ben Shapiro's takedown became the centerpiece of a much larger cultural conversation. A warning to studios that nostalgia isn't enough, that legacy matters, that fans are smarter than you think, and that no amount of branding can save a film if it's built on disrespect. Rachel Zegler became the face of that failure, not because she was untalented, but because she treated a beloved role like a burden. The lesson? If you're going to reboot a fairy tale, don't forget the fairy tale part. Don't erase the charm. Don't mock the magic. And for the love of storytelling, don't cast someone who looks like they'd rather be anywhere else. Because audiences can tell. And this time, they did. Loud and clear.